So you've got your private pilot's license in the UK, but what if you want to fly in the USA? Can you just fly here on your UK license, or do you have to get an FAA one too? Well, today I'm talking about how I got my FAA private pilot license based on my UK license this week on Fly with Noel Phillips. Now in this video I'll be talking primarily about my experiences converting my UK PPL to my American one, but the process is pretty similar for anybody who holds an ICAO private pilot's license, so let's get into it. Now, flying in the UK is absolutely amazing fun. I have spoken to you a lot before about the differences between flying over there in the UK and over here in the States. And I've made a video about it as well, showing the best bits of both sides. And I'll pop a link up on the screen to that as well, so you can check that video out. But what if the UK's glorious sunny weather and cheap prices of flying are just not cutting it anymore, and you want to come over here and fly in the States? Maybe you're coming over here on holiday, maybe you're even thinking about living over here. Well, you might be surprised to know that your UK private pilot's license is not valid here in the United States on its own to fly an American plane. You have to have an American private pilot's license at the same time. Now, the FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, they've got a process in place to get an FAA PPL based on the back of your foreign one, or your UK one in my case. It's quite a straightforward process. It's called a 6175 license, or commonly known as a piggyback license. It's called a piggyback license because effectively it's a license that sits on the back of your UK license and lets you fly and exercise the privileges of your UK license here in the US. There are a few exceptions I'll cover later in the video, but the process is really straightforward. Now that means as long as your UK license is valid, your American license will be valid at the same time. And remember that in the UK, your license itself doesn't expire, it's only the ratings on it that expire. So for example, my single engine piston rating that I had in the UK that allows me to exercise the privileges of my license, well, that rating runs out every 2 years and you have to get it renewed. But as long as you hold an American one, you also have to keep your ratings up to date on the American one as well. So effectively, although I can fly in the US at the moment using my PPL, if I want to go back to the UK after my SEP rating expires next year, well, I'll have to renew my SEP rating. It's quite straightforward. But if you're flying in both countries, then you are going to have to keep both of your ratings current. You also need to hold a valid medical certificate, of course, and with the piggyback license, you only have to hold one. It's valid based on either your UK medical or your American FAA medical. You don't need to have two medicals. If you went for a separate FAA private pilot's license, then you would need to get a separate medical for here in the States. But with the piggyback one, you can use your UK medical or an American one too. For me, I've got an FAA medical because FAA medical examiners are far easier to find here in the US, of course, than CAA ones are. Now, because it's a so-called piggyback license, that does mean that wherever you're flying, you not only have to carry your American license, but you have to carry this one as well, your UK one. There's no getting rid of your ring binder full of pieces of paper just yet in favour of your little credit card, unfortunately. Now, if you hold an instrument rating on your UK pilot's license, well, that's quite straightforward too. You can use that over here in the States as long as you complete the FAA written exam. However, there is a bit of an exception because the restricted instrument rating, or as it used to be known, the IMC rating in the UK, well, that isn't valid outside of the UK. So for me, I hold a restricted instrument rating. Since I've come here, I've had to start my full instrument training to get my full FAA instrument rating. But that instrument rating can sit on my piggyback license. It's quite easy to do. And if I ever do decide to get an FAA PPL at some point in the future as a standalone license, well, that instrument rating then will carry over to my FAA PPL at the same time. It's also worth pointing out that if you don't have your night rating in the UK, then you'll only be able to use your FAA license in daylight hours. And in the States, they do the night training as part of their PPL in the first place. So if you don't have night training experience in the UK, which is of course a separate rating over there, then you'll have a little endorsement on your license saying only valid in daytime hours or something similar. But if you're looking at doing this, it's probably worth getting your night rating in the UK before you go ahead and go for your FAA PPL, so that you got the full benefits of having the FAA PPL at the same time. Now, aircraft ratings, if you are flying such a plane that needs an aircraft rating, they can be transferred to your FAA PPL as well, as long as you're using it for private pilot use only. I think for CPLs, it's a little bit different. For commercial licenses, that's something you'll have to check out online. So what is the process to go ahead and get your FAA piggyback license? Well, thankfully, it's pretty straightforward. There's a few steps involved, but I'm going to show you today exactly what I did when I got mine. First things first, I had to go to the CAA website in the UK and give them permission to share my license information with the FAA. It's all to do with data protection and stuff, I think. It's quite a simple form to fill in. You put in your license details and what ratings you want to let the FAA have, and give them permission to send that information over to the Americans so they can then process it to give you your FAA license. And when you do that, you'll also have to pay your mandatory fee, because we all know that nothing is free in the world of aviation. When I did it a couple of years ago, it was £46. It's gone up to like £51 or something now. You pay that using your credit card, and then they will send all of your information over to the FAA. Next up, you have to hop onto the FAA's website and apply for verification of your foreign PPL. This is called an 8060-71 form. It's all very official sounding. You can either do it online, or you can fill in a piece of paper and send it off to the FAA, and then 3 weeks later they might receive it if the post office aren't on strike. Or you can do it all online using the IACRA system, which is the way that most people tend to do it these days, I think, and it's the way that I do it. Now, the system might look rather antiquated. It's a bit kind of Windows XP-ified, and it's a little bit buggy from time to time as well, but it does work quite well, and it allows you to do so much more than the CAA website does. You can apply for all of your private pilot ratings and everything using the FAA system. It's quite straightforward, whereas in the UK you have to fill in a bit of paper and send it off to the CAA by pigeon mail, and they might eventually get it and issue you your rating or whatever after that. The FAA system is all kind of computerized, and it's all quite good. You register for the IACRA system, you'll get something called an FTN number, an FAA tracking number, which is your number then, and it follows you through the FAA system as you get more licenses and stuff like that. You click the button to start the foreign license verification process and go through all the steps in the application before submitting it. And then after that, you have to wait for a few weeks for that all to be processed. Now, in my case, when I did it a few years ago, it took 3 weeks for it to come back, but they do say it can take 6 to 8 weeks, so make sure that you're giving it plenty of time. I won't go through the entire application process in this video because they've got papers to show you how to do that, but I had to provide information about my UK license, the number of hours I've done, which is worked out a bit differently over here in the States as well, because they log things like cross-country hours, which we don't do in the UK. So make sure that you sort of figure all that out before you put them all in. And it loads of information about you as well, including your hair colour, which for me was quite straightforward. There's guides online that show you how to fill it all in. It's all pretty straightforward to do. After waiting your time and assuming that everything's gone well, you'll be issued with a verification letter from the FAA, which means you can then proceed to the next step, which means a face-to-face meeting with a DPE, or designated pilot examiner. They're the same people that do your check rides over here for things like your instrument rating or your private pilot's license. This is the equivalent of an examiner in the UK, but in FAA land. You can either do that here in the States, or there are a couple of them in the UK as well that will do this for you. Now, for me, I used a guy who was based locally to me in the East Midlands. We met up at East Midlands Airport, where he sat and went through all of my paperwork, took 375 quid off me or something, and then gave me a piece of paper which was my temporary flight certificate. Yes, you can fly a plane in the US based on a bit of printed A4 paper, at least temporarily anyway, until your full license comes. They'll send you your full plastic card in the mail, which takes a few months in my case, because the American post office still seems to rely on pigeons to get their mail across the country. But the piece of paper effectively means you are good to go. And once you've got your piece of paper in your hand, you're ready to fly over to the States and prove to the Americans once and for all that you do in fact know how to fly a plane. Now, the FAA have a process that you need to do called a biennial flight review, or a BFR. You need one of these every 2 years. And I mentioned earlier about how in the UK you have to keep your ratings valid. Well, over here you do your biennial, your BFR, and that basically is your rating for the next 2 years. For me, I visited my friend Ludix Aviation over in Orlando. I'll pop a link to that video up on the screen from when we did that flight. Effectively, you just come over and it's like a check ride really. You're just doing a few maneuvers, a few stalls, a few circuits in the pattern, and also crucially learning about how things work here in the States, which is very different to how it is back in the UK. Now, I've done lots of videos where I talk about this, and I'm going to continue making videos talking about the differences between flying in the UK and flying in the US. It's all a little bit daunting at first, but over time you get used to it. And my piece of advice there would be use that BFR, your biennial, your first one that you have in the States, to learn as much as you can about things and how they work over here. Now your first BFR will probably be done at the same place that you are renting an aircraft from over here, so it's a good opportunity to learn about all the local procedures and stuff like that. Now better still, I would also recommend going online and doing an online ground school program for the PPL. Most of it you'll already know from having your PPL in the UK, but there's a lot of rules over here that are different. Airspace works very differently as well, so doing online ground school I found helped me quite a lot. There's also loads of YouTube videos as well that you can watch to figure out how the whole airspace system works over here as well. Now once you've got your piggyback license, you are good to go. You can rent aircraft here in the States just like you would in the UK, and you'll just need to check ride wherever you rent from before you go ahead and fly with them. But what if you want to fly something a little bit more exciting than a Cessna 172 or a Piper Warrior? Well, that's when things start to get interesting, because it works a little bit differently over here in terms of the whole rating situation. For starters, you need to get an endorsement for pretty much anything you want to fly outside of a basic plane. You need a high performance endorsement if you want to fly more than 200 horsepower. You need a complex endorsement if you want to fly with a floppy prop and retractable landing gear, and there's various other ones that you need as well. There's loads of them. Whereas in the UK you just need differences training. Here you need to have an actual formal program. You have to do an hour of instruction and a bit of ground school as well, and then you get an endorsement in your logbook which is official with the FAA. Your UK complex training will not let you fly a complex plane over here unless you get an endorsement in your logbook after you've completed the training required. So for me, for example, I flew the Piper Arrow in the UK and I'd done the differences training. I've got quite a bit of time in the Piper Arrow. If I wanted to fly an Arrow over here though, I'd need to then get my complex endorsement, which would mean an hour of ground school and at least an hour of flying as well, to prove that I know how to move a lever up and down to make the wheels move up and down. Now one thing you can do here in the States is to add ratings onto your piggyback license. I'm doing my instrument rating at the moment. When I get that, I'm sort of most of the way through doing that at the minute, but when I do get my instrument rating, that will sit on my piggyback license as a rating. When I eventually get my full FAA PPL, then I'll be able to have that added to that license as well, off the back of having it on my piggyback license. That does mean though, if I ever want to get a UK instrument rating, well then I'll have to go through a conversion process to get a UK instrument rating from my FAA one, and I think there's like 7 written exams and stuff to do it over there as well. I'm not an expert because I've not done it over there. Over here you just need 1 written exam and a load of training pretty much. But what are the downsides of using this piggyback system to get your license here in the States? Well, a lot of people are quite wary about building something called a house of cards, where effectively it just takes 1 link to be removed and the whole lot can come collapsing down. If your UK or ICAO PPL ever becomes invalid for some reason, well that means that your FAA one does at the same time, and therefore all the ratings that you've got on it will go at the same time. Should the rules and regulations ever change and they say that you can't do this piggyback thing anymore, well obviously then I'll have to get a full FAA PPL. But at the minute it works quite well for me like this, because it means I only need to have 1 medical. It simplifies the process quite a bit, and the fact that I can add ratings onto my American license as well is really handy for me. But overall, I don't think there's that many downsides to having a piggyback PPL over here. If anything, it's a bit more straightforward because it means I only need to keep 1 medical current at a time, rather than having to have 1 in the UK and 1 over here. But for somebody that lives in the US now, like I do, getting a full FAA PPL isn't that difficult to do. It's just a case of doing the skills test with an examiner, and then you can get a full FAA one. But at the minute, I don't really like exams, if I'm honest, and I don't like skills tests and things like that. I've got my instrument one at the minute, which I'm working on and hoping to get that soon. That's daunting enough to me without having to redo a PPL skills test at the same time. So I think for now I'm going to be happy with my piggyback license and maybe looking to get in the full FAA one down the line. But if you've gone for your piggyback license in the past and you've got an FAA one as well as your UK one, for instance, well, let me know what you thought of the whole process down in the comments, and also let me know what your pros and cons are to going down the piggyback route rather than getting a full FAA PPL. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. In the meantime, thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time back in the sky.